Which set here is better? Hey guys, this is JP's LEGO Reviews. Today, I'm going to do another LEGO Star Wars comparison. I'm going to compare the LEGO Star Wars AT-AT to the LEGO Star Wars AT-TE. With these two sets, I'm going to compare the displayability, the realism, the building experience, the value proposition, the minifigure selection, and the playability of these two LEGO sets right here. So let's break it down. Now, when it comes to the displayability of the LEGO set right here, which LEGO set is more displayable? Which one looks better if you are to display them? And it's easily the AT-AT. The reason why is because, frankly, it's double the size of the AT-TE, and that makes a huge difference because the AT-AT looks far more sort of formidable and far more just imposing as a display set. It occupies more space and it makes it look better on display because of its size compared to the AT-TE, where it's half the size of the AT-AT. And the AT-AT has a more commanding presence on display, where the AT-TE doesn't really have much of the commanding presences at all. But now, let's move on to the realism of these two sets. Now, which set here is the most realistic to the real-life counterpart? Well, it's not actually real life, but to the counterpart found in the Star Wars movies. And the most realistic set here is actually both of them. They're both equally realistic. The AT-AT is very realistic to what we see in Empire Strikes Back, but the AT-TE is just as realistic to what we see in the prequels. And because both of these sets are equally as realistic, I give it a tie because there's nothing really about one or the other that's either less or more realistic than the other. But now, let's move on to the building experience. And the reason why I want to cover building experience is because you're going to spend quite a while building these two LEGO sets here. But which LEGO set actually provides a better building experience? Well, it's a tie. The reason why is because you would assume that the AT-AT gives you a better building experience. And in a lot of ways it does. The AT-AT surprised me by how big it actually was when I constructed it, while the AT-TE was surprising because of how small it was once I constructed it, which that's not really good. But the AT-TE, the set on the right, has so many different sort of building techniques that are really interesting. And it's quite fascinating to see the AT-TE come together. It's such an unusual sort of build that they're both just as good of the building experience as each other, and they're both very engaging. Because some LEGO Star Wars builds can be a bit boring, but neither of these sets are actually boring to build, which is awesome to see. But now, let's move on to the value proposition of these two sets, because arguably, this is probably the most important category that you should consider when purchasing these two LEGO sets. But which one is a better value for money? In the US, I think it's a $20 to $30 difference between the AT-TE and the AT-AT. Meanwhile, in Australia, it's a $30 difference again. But which one is a better value for money? Or in other words, is the AT-AT worth the extra that it's charged at? Well, it's not just worth the extra you're charged at, but the AT-TE is slightly overpriced. And because it's more overpriced than what the AT-AT should be, the AT-AT is a better value for money because you get a very impressive build for just maybe $20 to $30 on average more. It's double the size, which makes a difference because even though it has a very similar amount of parts, the way that it's designed, the AT-AT, makes it feel like it's worth more than the AT-TE simply because of the size of the build. The minifigures in the AT-AT are fantastic, but its presence and its commanding presence when on display really makes the difference between value proposition. But now, let's move on to the minifigure selection. Now, this is probably the easiest category for a particular set to win. And so the ATTE, or the minifigures on the right. And here are a few reasons why. You get 2 more minifigures. You can create a proper battle with these sets. Meanwhile, here, you can only make maybe a duel at best. Plus, we get to see 4 212th Clone Troopers all at the back, which are quite rare to find. And we see Commander Cody, which hasn't been made for a long time, and Commander Cody as a minifigure has also been executed very, very well. And because of all these reasons, the minifigures clearly go onto the ATTE. But before I move on to the playability of these 2 LEGO sets, I'm actually going to do an extra little sort of comparison. Which side build is better? Now, I don't think either of them are that good, but the ATTE build is slightly better because the Spider Droid can stand on its own. Meanwhile, not the sled, but the Hoth Speeder can't even, stand up on itself. And that's just not good for a side build. But now, let's move on to the playability of these 2 sets. Which LEGO set here is more playable? Now, this is quite difficult because neither of these sets are what you call super playable. Both sets, if you move the legs too much, will collapse onto each other. And also, both of these builds aren't the easiest or the most fun to play with. They look good on display, but if you're looking at a thing to properly play with, I will say that ships or starfighters, for example, are far, far better to play with. But which set here is better to play with? Well, I'm going to award it to the ATTE for 2 main reasons. Firstly, the cannons on the ATTE are far easier to access, and you can easily shoot down enemy ships or vehicles, or just enemies in general. Secondly, it comes with a hook, or not a hook, but a handle rather, where you can carry the ATTE from place to place, and that makes a big difference because you can kind of drop it wherever you feel like it without, obviously you need to be careful, but you can carry it much easier than the AT-AT, and it's far more movable in this aspect than the AT-AT, making it better to play with, and the minifigures allow for you to have a better sort of imaginary fight as well. But now, let's move on to my final thoughts on this comparison. What are my final thoughts on the LEGO Star Wars comparison between the ATTE and the AT-AT? Well, firstly, the AT-AT won in 2 critical categories, being displayability and value proposition, which those are very important categories. Meanwhile, the ATTE sort of just won it on playability. There are 2 major things, and the side build is slightly better, and the Minifigure Selection is quite a bit better. But in my opinion, it sort of all equals out. But which set here is better? It comes down to one sort of criteria, and that's value proposition. And the reason why is because both of these sets are highly, highly, highly good quality sets. They are both built to the best of the ability that LEGO could have. They both have had effort and effort poured into it. They can't really be too much better than what they already are. But for only $30 to maybe $15 or $30 more, depending on where you live, the AT-AT wins this comparison, because for just that little amount more, you get a build that is far more imposing. It has basically the same amount of playability. It has a good minifigure selection. The side build's okay. The building experience is awesome. And there's nothing really wrong with either 2 sets, but the ATTE feels like a better value for money. And that's actually really important, because if you had these 2 sets side by side, they're pretty equal in all aspects. But because of the fact that the ATTE feels a lot bigger, it's not actually as big as what you'd expect, but you get the feeling of size. Meanwhile, with the ATTE, you don't. The sort of way that the ATTE is and the pricing that they've chosen for it makes this set better than the ATTE when it comes to the overall comparison. But let me know what your thoughts are on these two sets. Which one would you rather buy? Again, let me know down below. If you enjoyed the video, please smash the like button. If you want to see more content like this, please subscribe. I hope you guys have a truly magnificent day and keep building.